Greetings, everyone. Greetings and welcome. I've been thinking about the way we used to talk in old school MMOs. Back then, there was this language, these certain words and phrases and ways to say things that meant so much. And you didn't learn it necessarily from a tutorial. You picked it up from experience, sometimes even from dying. And a lot of that is gone now. So today I made a list and I'd like to talk about some of those old terms, stuff we used to say, the lost language of MMOs, if you will. Some of you might remember them and maybe that'll bring something back. And if you don't, maybe you'll understand a little bit about what it felt like to be there. And I was very pleasantly surprised in playing EverQuest lately, Monsters and Memories, Pantheon, Adrulan Online Adventures. I was able to see these words again. And so it really brought a lot back for me. So let me go through my list here. So we're going to call this the lost language of MMOs. The first word is a mob. Mob or MOB, I suppose. But we used to call them mobs for short. I believe that stands for mobile object. And this was from old MUDs, which was kind of the precursor to MMOs. So a MUD is like a multi-user dungeon. So it's something that harkens back to that. So a mob is just basically an enemy creature, an enemy. So a lot of these Burn-Eye and skeletons wandering around in the field of bone, those would be mobs. So you can just say, hey, pull this mob to our camp. Pulling, I think, is another word. But instead of saying enemies or hostiles, we would just call them mobs. There would be named mobs as well. So named is another word. Usually that's something. Back in the day, they would name it a skeleton, a scorpion, a human mercenary, a human bandit, whatever it would be, and it would all be lowercase. But sometimes a named version would spawn, whether that skeleton or bandit would have a name or any kind of variation with capital letter in the name. That usually meant better gear, a tougher fight, and sometimes it meant your grind might finally pay off. And it was exciting to see a named pop up or spawn, which is another word, pop. Pop just means something spawned basically in your vicinity. So oftentimes we would have camps and we would wait on pops to spawn. Aggro is another word. Aggro, I suppose that means aggravation or aggravated. I have aggro. I have enemy aggro. It means that the enemy is now attacking me. Usually tanks would do their best to hold aggro, and you didn't want aggro if you were a healer, DPS, whatever. One of my favorite ones, train. So a train is it's interesting. This is really one of the good ones. So basically, back in the day, a zone would be basically a self-contained complete area. So you would have to zone out or zone in. We'll touch on that as well. But when you were in the zone, when you got aggro, when you got enemies to attack you, they would not stop, unlike today, I think if you run a certain enough distance away, enemies would just go back to their position. But in EverQuest, they would chase you until you either die or you zone out. So sometimes especially in dungeons where people are set in their areas and they're waiting, if you got attacked or the group wiped, something bad happened, you had to run all the way out, you would yell train to zone. That means a lot of enemies would be chasing you and you would try to get out. So that usually gave a lot of players a heads up to get away, move away, turn invisible, feign death, whatever. And oftentimes you wouldn't have time to really yell that out. So some people would put macros that they would just click, alerting the whole zone. So feign death is another one. FFD, short for feign death. This is something that necromancers, shadow knights could cast, and monks also have an ability. So this means it's basically like a fake death to drop aggro. Very, very useful for people pulling. So oftentimes there would be a room with 4 or 5 enemies. So there could be ways to work in tandem. You might want to split up the room so you pull a single mob. You could feign death to split the mobs. What else here do we have on my list? So one beautiful thing about the resurgence of these classic games is that the mythical fourth class is now back in the sense of CC, crowd control, debuffing, buffing, that kind of thing. So typically MMOs now have reverted to the holy trinity, as they say. You have a tank, healer, and DPS. Most people are familiar with this. Games like EverQuest had a fourth class kind of in the mix in the form of an enchanter that could do CC or crowd control. I believe that's fairly common. Most of us know CC, but it was called Mez back in the day. So that was something that enchanters, bards could do. So they could basically mesmerize enemies, charm them as well. Is another variant of that. So you could basically mind control an enemy and make it fight another enemy, and then strategically time it to where you could get that enemy low from fighting another enemy and then drop the mez or the charm or whatever, and then you could kill it after it had just a few more percentage of HP. So that's really something that's very exciting, that I'm so happy that to see that back. There was also different ways to deal with certain things. So I guess this could all be lumped up into the same thing. You had root, which was like a stationary. The enemy still kind of has aggro on you, but it's rooted. So if you just back up, it can't reach you. If you hit it, that would break root. Of course, it would break mez as well. So charm just kind of breaks on its own. It was very overpowered. Snare is another one. Snare is just kind of like movement speed. Kiting, what was another term? Oh, there's just so many here. Slow would be technically another one. Enchanters, bards, shaman, they could slow. Druids could snare. Necromancers could snare. And that led to kiting. So if you were snared, you move real slow. So one strategy in these kind of games was just to snare a bunch of mobs and then kind of go around in a circle, slowly whittling them down. That was known as kiting. Real fun, real fun. I used to do it on my necromancer quite a bit. Either way, those are some terms that you might see pop up. Tap and life tap. So shadow knights, necromancers, they could life tap. So you could steal HP and basically heal yourself. So let's say the cleric is AFK or on their way back from a wipe and we're all waiting. You could tap tank in the meantime in order to sustain yourself without a healer. Another thing that we have on the list is it's mostly in the form of buffs, but SOW, which is really famous, Spirit of Wolf, which was a movement speed buff. Druids, shamans could cast it, and I believe some spells have some variation, Spirit of something, but essentially SOW, and the name really stuck. Can I get a so? Very helpful, especially since you had to travel the land. There was no teleporting necessarily, so you had to travel long distances, and a Spirit of Wolf would certainly help you. I guess Celos is the bard equivalent. So bards could also have a variant of that, but that's not as popular. Although cello is also a very famous term, but you'll hear so a lot, and I think Adrulan has something like that exactly. Levitate or DMF as well. So certain spellcasters could cast Levitate, and in EverQuest there was a sort of like a bobbing effect. So you would be just like floating a little bit, and it was kind of cozy. It took me a while to get used to it, but I liked it. You could traverse huge areas without taking damage. You could go over lava. You could just kind of get around zones more safely. Some zones were very clunky. They had high spots and low spots. You could take a lot of damage just going up a hill or down a hill or something like that. So Levitate is a really good one. Necromancers could cast DMF, which stands for Dead Man Floating. That kind of gave you underwater breathing, ultra vision, and levitate, which was kind of interesting. It was a desirable buff. There is gate and bind. So you have a location that you spawn in if you're in trouble. So if you die, you have to respawn. You spawn at your binding point. So it's usually your starting city, your starting area. Okay, well, my cat wants to get out, so hang out just a second. So you have your binding location, which you could change as well. So certain classes could bind, maybe at the entrance of a new dungeon if you don't want to run too far, etc. So you could change your spawn location, and then gate basically teleports you back to your spawn location. So that's something nice that has some resurgence. You have evac or succor, I suppose. Certain druids, wizards could evacuate the group safely. You have COH, which was Call of Hero. That's something that mages could do. They could summon you back. They could summon you to a location, but you had to be in the zone. I remember in Chardock, they had a group kind of work their way through, and they were using COH to basically organize and get the raid all in that location as well. What else do we have? You have ports as well, I suppose, could be lumped in the same category, maybe under gates or bind. So druids could port, wizards could port. There were certain druid rings or wizard spires around the land, and you could basically be teleported to certain locations. So druids were very sought after for that regard. They were excellent healers. They could do a little bit of everything. Um, we have Corpse Run or CCR. So back in the day, EverQuest was basically the Souls of MMOs before Dark Souls. It was a Souls game before Souls, I suppose. It was brutally difficult. If you die, you have to go back to where you died, and you had your corpse, and you had to loot everything from your corpse. So that was fun. And sometimes you can say, hey, I died in Blackborough. You spawn naked at your bind point, and you say, hey, can I get a soul for CR? Can I get a Spirit of Wolf for my corpse run? It would certainly help. Some people would buff you up. Buffs is another thing too. I mean, that's pretty standard. I don't suppose this is an extinct term. But certain classes could buff you up exceptionally well to where you would have the power or the capability to fight stuff from like much higher levels. You would effectively level up basically. The buffs were serious buffs. They weren't like they could really propel you and power level you. PL, that's actually another term. Some buffs were good enough to be to power level you. Druids had very powerful damage shields. Clerics had very powerful armor class and hit point type stuff. Shaman had just raw stats, strength, dex, haste. Enchanters as well, haste, stuff for mana recovery. Very interesting stuff. What else do we have? You could get a resurrection from a cleric. At that point, they had 96%, I believe, was the max res. So even if you died, you still lost a little bit. Clerics had basically a clicky stick or a res stick. That's another one as well. So a clicky is something that's quite useful. It's basically an item that you have in your inventory or a piece of armor that you wear that actually has an effect. So you click it and it's an instant spell cast. So they had certain stuff maybe for like an HP buff or underwater breathing, let's say, or just like a little buff. One of the most famous ones was J boots, Journeyman's boots. Those were boots that you could quest, and you could be any class, and you can have your own personal Spirit of Wolf by clicking your J boots. So that's a clicky. It's a really nice, useful item to have on hand. A lot of the epic weapons also had clickies, and another term was like, oh, this person has their epic or they're epicked out. You know, rogue or bard epic. You could just advertise. Generally, it was a player that obviously they've been doing some raiding, known to be a good player. If you had your epic, that's kind of like the end game of weapons. And one of the things I like too in EverQuest, your epic was this amazing. It was almost like this amazing journey throughout the world, doing all these different things, killing high level monsters, doing quests, faction grinding, whatever it might be. And you do this world spanning quest to get this weapon that just really screams out whatever your class is. And some of those epics had clickable effects, worn effects. They were just excellent. Absolutely excellent. What else do we have? Well, in certain instances, you could D-level as well. you could lose your level if you lose too much experience. So, it taught you that the world was dangerous. You had to be careful. There's danger around every corner. This isn't, once you start getting up there, it takes so long to level and grind that you typically don't want to lose that level. So it forces you to be careful. But that's something that could happen in EverQuest. There was hell levels as well, which was kind of like a level that was considered more difficult to get through because it took like a larger percentage of XP in order to actually level. What else do we have? This isn't something that's really gone extinct, but LFG, LFM, looking for group, looking for more. Pug, a pickup group, a static group is something that's kind of newer, I suppose. I've discovered this term in Final Fantasy XIV. Maybe it's been around for a while, but pug and static, hear that a lot. And then certain group roles. So a puller would be someone that goes out to the field or the camp and pulls back to the party. Sometimes as the tank, but not necessarily, because tanks had to kind of do their own stuff, and certain groups, once a puller comes back to the group and the tank takes the mob, the group starts killing it. Sometimes the puller would go back out. So their only job was just to bring single mobs back to the camp. So really, really interesting. Sometimes a monk or a bard would be considered the safest pullers. Sometimes enchanters would do it, I suppose. And that, of course, is where crowd control comes in as a role in case something goes wrong. A camp as well is one of those, but I think that's fairly common as well. So dungeons were open world, so everyone would have a camp. So at Drulin Online Adventures, for example, we were camping the bandit fort entrance. Sometimes people were like upstairs or maybe like in the courtyard or maybe the basement. So each dungeon had several camps, and your camp was the camp that you were holding. Good etiquette is, you could ask for a camp check. So sometimes people will say, hey, just looking for what's camped in this zone. And that could be done with /OOC, which is out of character. That's something I started doing a lot. I reverted back to this language in Edrulin Online Adventures. I would do /OOC, but basically global chat or a local chat. Ads. So you typically don't want ads in the camp. Ads, patrol, pop. Those are things you might associate with a camp. So ads means, we have more enemies now to kill, more mobs. You have static mob locations, and you have patrols. You have mobs that actually patrol, buff themselves, etc. So those are some other words. But yeah, OOC is a really big one. That's something that's very widely used. The hero's journey, OOC chat is alive. P99. But it stands for out of character. You could do shout. That's typically a good way to advertise train to zone. OOC chat was typically green. Shout is red, so it's like a warning. If someone shouts, it's for a zone train. You need to be careful. Some other words here. This is pretty standard, I guess. Loot etiquette is need before greed. In a random pickup groups, typically, if you if you need an item, let's say like a nice ring dropped, but only wisdom users could use it, so only clerics, shaman, whatnot could use it, you would roll. And how you would do that is type slash random 100. So that would roll a magical dice from 0 to 100, and whoever rolls the highest number wins. So that is something that's fun. Twink means that you got some really nice gear. EverQuest used to not have level restrictions, so you could twink out a low level character with really powerful items from your main character. So if you have an alt or a tune, then you could twink them out. That's basically another term for a character. I hear people using that a lot. I never used it too much personally. Then of course you could power level that tune, PL. I guess that's kind of close to that term. If someone went LD or link dead, it means they were disconnected in the middle of the game. So sometimes by their nameplate it would have LD. So if someone just went link dead, that's not good. You have to wait on them to get back again. Role playing, I suppose. You could activate role playing, so you could be kind of anonymous and like really try to fall into your character. Like let's say I'm role playing a rogue or necromancer. You know, I'm kind of evil and cosplaying basically. So some basic terms regarding loot, I suppose, would be like if an item was no drop or a lore item, it means you can't trade it. You can only have one of those. Vendor trash. You could just say, well, these mobs just drop vendor trash, so we don't need to worry about them too much. Just sell it and split the loot, which is nice. Certain names of loot had abbreviations, I suppose. FBSS, flowing black silk sash, which was like a really highly sought after haste item. Multitude of items had abbreviations, so that's something we might see. Zones had abbreviations. So, for example, Dragon Necropolis would be DN. Wall of Slaughter would be WOS. Plane of Knowledge would be POK. EC Tunnel. Various combinations regarding that whole deal. For the economic purposes of it, WTB would be want to buy, want to sell, want to trade, those kind of terms you might see. So I'm sure in Monsters and Memories, Adrulan, Online Adventures, unless they have dedicated auction houses or whatnot, you might see people spamming this in the chat occasionally. You know, I want to sell this item, or I want to buy this. So these two probably are more common than want to trade. What else do we have? So back in the day too, I briefly touched on zones, but so you could say, hey, we're meeting at the zone line to Shaded Dunes or, you know, wherever, Kern's Tower. So zone line, we're at the zone in. This is where we are, or zone out. So a good example is, so we're camping near the zone line. So if things get bad, we can zone out. Zone lines are generally considered safe, but they're also kind of considered risky because people running through could possibly be training the zone line or train to zone. That's a common shout. We used to have to wait on boats, so the boat wait time, um, that kind of goes without saying. You literally have to wait on a boat because that's how you travel the world. Um, Teleporting, translocation, TL. These are in no particular order, by the way, and so that's another one that I had on my list. Um, so certain clerics could have a CH or a complete heal later on. Sometimes it's called a chill. Basically stands for complete heal, or chain heal. So in certain raids, clerics would coordinate. It's a very long casting spell. So clerics would coordinate casting complete heal on the tanks to effectively chain heal them or complete chain heal. In raids, that was a really common strategy. Mob pathing. Sometimes pathing would be weird on mobs. Sometimes they would run backwards into a room and pull other stuff along with them. Sometimes the pathing would be weird. Trash mobs, mobs that don't matter, just kill them. Interesting thing is that raids would have a lot of trash mobs. It wasn't so formulaic. You had to still clear through an entire zone. They're trash mobs, named mobs, mini bosses, mini raids, whatever. And yeah, so these are a lot of the words that I can think of that harken back to the lost language of MMOs. Thank you for joining me and reminiscing with me. If you know of any words that I might have missed, please share them. I covered a lot. I'm sure I didn't cover everything. And yeah, but this was really fun to do. And these are words that you might see in older style games. And a lot of these have gone extinct, to be honest. And a lot of these were specific to EverQuest in particular, but you might see them in some of these other games. I have, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. So thank you very much for joining me. This was a fun video with the notepad. Something I haven't done before, but I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. Please let me know if I missed anything, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful day.